by all reports, it is being seen and smelled. The chlorine, 50 miles, 75 miles, as far as Marietta, Georgia, which is over 50 miles away from Conyers, where this is. So this, to me, if I didn't know, if I was just looking at this looks like East Palestine to me, which we've been covering extensively. And obviously we're still covering, and we're going to give you an update and some breaking news, exclusive news on that in a bit. Joining me now, Scott Smith, who has been doing amazing work on East Palestine. He's an independent tester, has done over 30 trips to East Palestine, Ohio, and has also done a lot of testing and contamination testing in a whole lot of other areas, including Flint. So we were going to talk about East Palestine, but we obviously need to talk about this too, because this, by all intents and purposes, is still going on. And honestly, you're getting more accuracy from people on Twitter than Georgia's version of FEMA and the EPA. And I don't know about you, but it just seems like, despite all of these happening in different places, it's kind of the same story and the same playbook being used. First, let me show you, because this is just staggering to me. But there was an alert that went out to residents in the affected area. I don't know within what radius, but I saw it on Twitter, and then people were sending this to me. Residents got this on their phone, I guess, nearby this plant. Public safety alert, Georgia Emergency Management Agency, Homeland Security Agency. So I guess that's Georgia's version of FEMA. On behalf of the Environmental Protection Division local area emergency, due to Rockdale County BioLab fire, the EPA is monitoring air quality for chlorine and related compounds. Chemical levels are, quote, all caps, unlikely to cause harm to most people. Seems pretty damn premature to say unlikely to. I mean, chlorine, this is not just chlorine in its form going into the pools. It's combusted into the air. So now we're talking chlorine gas. And as we still, a year and a half later, we don't even know all the chemicals that were released in East Palestine. So we have no idea, other than chlorine gas, what is in the air. But there are reports in Atlanta area, we're going to go through all of them, but several cities and towns, 20 miles, 30 miles, 50 miles of haze, people inhaling chlorine, eyes irritating, nausea, these kind of symptoms. And the Georgia FEMA, it seems, speaking in conjunction with the EPA, again, saying nothing to see here. Am I getting this wrong?
No, Jordan, you're right. It's the same playbook. You're going to see it all over again. Nothing to see here. And thank God for independent journalists like yourself. And, you know, shame this, what, I don't know what you call it this day, the so-called mainstream media. They're all part of the problem here, because they're complicit in the cover-up with how the whole system works. And the fact that you're already seeing nothing to see here, it's safe. I can tell you, there are a couple people I've worked closely with in Florida, and unrelated algae toxin blooms that live pretty close to ground zero. And I'll share some of this off the record with you over the next few days, but I will be there in probably the next 3 to 5 days. There are people coming forward to me that have deposits, you know, soot, plumes over horse barns, and so on. So it is quite an impact. And, you know, X and Facebook, I haven't seen Facebook censor anything yet, but there is a group of citizens banding together and sharing information. That's the way the truth is going to get out here.
And, you know, not that you're a toxicologist or anything, but chlorine gas used in World War I, not particularly good to be inhaling. Well, and they're saying there's a shelter in place. So this affects approximately 90,000 residents. They say the advice is shelter in place, keep your windows down. But at the same time, they're saying this won't harm most people. Those two things don't make sense to me.
Well, as you know, I really have a great scientific team around me with toxicologists. I work closely with George Thompson and a whole variety. In fact, I'm presenting on East Palestine at the upcoming Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. And I can tell you, in complete combustion with chlorine, creates a whole host of chemicals, not the least of which is the dioxins. We don't know enough yet. We know chlorine. We don't know enough about the chemicals involved. We do know that there's some alarming levels of various chemicals. We do know that people are reporting some symptoms. We don't know exactly the cause and effect, but this is the early stages. The important thing, learning about how all these cover-ups work, it's really important to get information out there and start doing testing right away. Here we go again. All clear, safe, no problems. You can't find what you don't look for.
And that was my next question, because it seems that in many of these situations, number one, we don't know what they're testing for. We don't know what equipment they're using, because as you've seen in East Palestine, a lot of the equipment they're using seems inadequate by the EPA's own admission, as far as not being able to detect all levels of contamination. And number three, and most importantly, why is it that I'm seeing on Twitter, Colin, if we could show this, amateur testers with like equipment that could read formaldehyde? If you could show that, Colin. This was just on Twitter that someone has a reading of formaldehyde 53 miles away in Marietta, Georgia. Let me read that. I've never seen HCHO levels this high. That's formaldehyde. I had to check multiple times thinking something isn't right. If you're in the metro Atlanta area, stay indoors. 100 mg/M3 is off the chart. Anything above 0.5 is considered unhealthy. You are breathing in cancer. This is in, again, Marietta, 53 miles from Conyers chemical fire. Formaldehyde is linked to all sorts of cancers. Again, I mean, I'm not there. I'm not the EPA or a scientist. I presume they're looking for formaldehyde, but you shouldn't presume anything when it comes to the EPA, because as I've exposed in the case of East Palestine, they detected vinyl chloride, which was the toxic cancerous gas that Norfolk Southern detonated over East Palestine and Western Pennsylvania. 5 cars of it they detonated. They detected it, and they never notified the public. In fact, they detected it at the same time they were telling the public they're still not finding it. So I have no idea if they're testing for formaldehyde in the air, how far they would be testing, and if they're finding it and they're just not saying anything. I'm not one of these people that says never trust the government, they're always lying, but how is it that people over 50 miles away, Scott, are detecting high level? If you're detecting high levels of formaldehyde in the air 50 miles away, what in God's green earth is in the air 5 miles away?
Exactly. And it's, close to ground zero and testing out now. Is it a sheer coincidence that whoever took that test has never seen levels like that? Usually there aren't coincidences in things like this, I can tell you. Usually 2 rules: you can't find what you don't look for, and there are not coincidences. And on a larger scale, I just don't understand why the government is not here to protect us, and the EPA with their 17,000 employees and their $12 billion budget.
Colin, let's kind of go through and show people the full impacts of this. Conyers Plume from the Blue BioLab fire yesterday. So let's show the in Conyers, an Atlanta suburb, a BioLab chemical plant burns because of 40 years of deregulation. This is from just put them up as you have them. So there's massive plume from yesterday. There's still a plume that could be seen far away. So you could just keep going to whatever images, video you have. So that's a residential home. The plume is right in the neighborhood in suburbia. You could close your windows, but depending how high the levels are, I mean, doesn't necessarily mean there's no exposure closing your windows. whatever you got. This is from I-20. So as people were driving on the highway yesterday, I mean, this is like a dystopian, Walking Dead type of movie shit or TV show. And it looks, like Scott said, very eerily similar to East Palestine, Ohio. And remember, they want you to think in East Palestine, they blew up over 1 million pounds of toxic cancerous gas, but it just vanished into the air and everything's fine. This is haze. I believe this was in Stenville, was it? Let me make sure I have the name of the town right. Yeah, Snellville, excuse me. So the smoke from the BioLab fire in Conyers definitely traveled to Snellville, which is 15.5 miles away. Then you have Gwinnett, travel to Gwinnett, which is even further. Gwinnett is 21 miles away. This is today, by the way. That's images from today, not yesterday.
It reminds me of those, World War I movies where they have the gas and you see all the troops, getting contaminated and poisoned. And that haze is depositing all kinds of contaminants in the soil.
And by the way, not all schools in this surrounding area were closed today. I don't have the exact radius. Some were closed, but not all were closed. So you could potentially have kids playing outside in recess. We're getting messages from as far as 60 to 70 miles away of people seeing a haze and smelling this stuff. And again, we don't know if it's only chlorine gas. God knows what chemicals could have been created that aren't even manufactured at the plant just through combustion. And what's amazing to me, and I'm not saying that the media should not be covering the aftermath of Helene, the hurricane. Clearly they should. But you would kind of think like, I don't know, Atlanta's a pretty big city. This area, it's not in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they should cover it if it's in the middle of nowhere anyway. I saw like updates on CNN and then they just go to other things. Wouldn't you think this should be like a massive recurring story just all day giving us updates? Because this is a chemical agent that was used in the World War that could affect, thousands and thousands of Americans.
You would think most of the reporters would be on site reporting this.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And by the way, what's going to happen here, I can pretty much assure you, and I'm sure you would agree, Scott, I don't know, what's today, Monday? By Wednesday, they're going to officially stamp nothing to see here. Everybody will be home. The residents will continue messaging people like me and Scott. Everything is not fine. And then, essentially, you'll have independent testers come in and say, oh, no, everything's not fine. Look at that. And then maybe you'll have some type of settlement. And then you're going to have cancer down the road. That's usually what happens in these things. But it's going to be swept under the rug. And the most news you'll be getting from Georgia is Trump versus Harris.
Jordan, I just saw a comment come in, clouds in Lawrenceville, and the school board, said everyone to stay inside. So I think,
Good.
There's a lot, we're going to see a lot more feedback in the next 24 hours. Again, it should be considered legal malpractice for any government agency to put out nothing to see here narratives when things are being shut down and people say, turn off the air conditioning.
And also, I just want to be very, very clear, because there is a fine line and balancing act between not creating a panic and recklessly endangering people's lives with bad information. But when you say, Colin, if you could put the original public safety alert back up, when you say the EPA is monitoring air quality for chlorine and related compounds, chemical levels are unlikely to cause harm to most people. Let me just explain what that means. That is lawyered up language. Put that back up. A lawyer wrote that. When they say chemical levels are unlikely to cause harm to most people. What does that fucking mean? What are the chemical levels? Unlikely is pretty in between. Unlikely means it could happen, it might not happen. What does most people mean? I don't know, Scott. I've heard
Well,
I've heard all the time. Everybody, you know, a doctor will say every patient's different. Every
that's
person's
right.
affected differently. Every person's immune system is
Well,
differently. What that to me is basically a lawyer writing whatever they have to cover their ass.
exactly. And here we go again. Like, what of air, soil, surface, and water testing? What is the easiest one to game where you can legitimately miss things and you can alter things? Air testing. So they're only doing air testing. When I'm getting enough pictures of things being deposited, black particles in soil, what about the soil testing? And you see all that smoke that you just showed. It's all the plume appears to be deposited something on soil and surfaces where you have livestock, pets, kids walk around and play. Here we go again. What do we know from East Palestine? And even some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, it's very easy to manipulate testing results, especially if you don't do any soil testing. But air testing is the easiest to manipulate to whatever narrative to fit the nothing to see here narrative.
I just got a message. Outside smells like a swimming pool. I think that BioLab is still putting gunk in the air. Yeah. But to be clear, that, you know, you might smell chlorine and be like, all right, it's not so bad. You know, sometimes I've smelled water that has too much chlorine. Yeah. But if you're smelling it in the air, that would mean it's now in gas form, which can cause all sorts of problems. Some might be temporary. Some might be longer lasting. It really just depends how high the levels are and how long it persists. Correct?
Correct. And you'll know the minute you see CTEH on the ground. And I remember early on in the public, community meetings in the gymnasiums where the quote CTEH independent, but not independent contractors saying, it's your perfume you're wearing, you're allergic, it's in your head. So look
and just
for
so people know what he's referring to, CTEH was the independent testing contractor that Norfolk Southern used to basically say everything's fine in East Palestine, and they seem to be the go-to testing company for all corporations trying to lie to people.
So don't be surprised when you see CTEH appear. That's when you know that the truth is far different from what you're being told. You'll see CTEH and a whole host of other people. Who knows? Maybe they'll even get Dr. Arch Carson to do a video.
Right.
And say, nothing to see here. There's zero risk of getting sick.